Okay, so I'm Jennifer Scapitone. I teach here at the university, and it is my extreme pleasure to be introducing our guests, Lyrae van Clief Stefanon and Cecil Giscombe, also known as C.S. Giscombe. We have this opportunity to have two writers in the room that represent a mentor-mentee relationship, which is really neat. So I'm going to introduce C.S. Giscombe first. I want to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on the ancestral homelands of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi, as well as a site of healing and exchange for more than a dozen other Native tribes, and that Chicago hosts one of the largest indigenous populations in the United States. For years, I anchored a course of mine surrounding the poetics of dislocation with the 2008 collection of prose poems by C.S. Giscombe titled Prairie Style. Coastal until arrival in this state, I found myself at sea in what Americans are in the habit of calling rather settler colonially the Midwest. The rewritings of prairie style composed by this poet, essayist, memoirist, professor, and railway engineer of Jamaican and Canadian descent, born in Dayton, Ohio, granted me tethers through which to understand this inland geography via and against the place's self-congratulatory branding of style. Prairie Style was written between specific named addresses in Pennsylvania, Nova Scotia, and Berkeley, and on Amtrak. Giscombe's Black River, appearing in a cycle of poems about downstate Illinois, is at once Jamaican and North American, the crocodile tethering all. And yet, these stratifications of experience, these plots at fisticuffs, these aphorisms and jokes, places are the talk about them, map this inland continental zone acutely and anhedonically, to use Giscombe's term. Through Frank Lloyd Wright's Usonian Designs for Servantless Families, Robert Taylor's notorious public housing projects, Foxes and Headlights, the Afro Prairie, sending us back to Gwendolyn Brooks's The Last Quatrain in the Ballad of Emmett Till, Chaos in Windy Grays through a Red Prairie. This might sound simpler than it actually is. Closure regathers the shape of the original undoing, the place where memory changed or picked up. These stanzas paradoxically displace within the form of the aphorism the violence of the plantation, genocide, redlining, never far behind each proposition, properties a measure of elimination. The railroad junction, birthplace of blues, is arguably the most important locus in the development of American lyric. Giscombe knows this locus with an intimacy few can aspire to. The great Barbadian poet and scholar Kamau Brathwaite spoke of Giscombe's train coming out of the east into inland and distance and becoming, creating a vernacular of vacancy along the numinous junctions and stations of the meditation, emanation, convergence, crossover, beyond merely metal. To know the railroad is to know the landscape, for as Giscombe points out, the railroad is intimately connected to features of land and water, the stuff that is, the stuff that defines. But it is knowing equally the infrastructure of social division, the machinations of creating, enforcing, and abiding within a wrong side of the tracks. Even Giscombe's long 1994 poem titled Here was interested primarily in the path traced by a moving point. Like the joint of a prosthesis that moves with surprising ease into and out of dislocation, Giscombe's poetry is firm in restlessness. The research that pervades his travelogue memoir in prose, Into and Out of Dislocation, from the year 2000, can emanate from the apparently simple fact of a name, Coombe being a Celtic term for the flank of a hill, which Giscombe, a possible so-called corruption of Gascoigne, which the author attributes to the mess of Europe, while specifying that names have always been a problem for Black people in America, that Anglo-Saxon patronyms were adopted by ancestors fleeing the plantation as token of their optimism and forgiveness. Giscombe's most recent books include similarly Border Towns and Ohio Railroads. His honors and awards include the Stephen Henderson Award in Poetry, the American Book Award, and the Carl Sandburg Prize. He has taught at Cornell, Syracuse, Illinois State, Naropa, the New York Poets in the Schools program, and Penn State. He currently teaches at UC Berkeley, where he runs the Mixed Blood Project, a cycle of readings and conversations, and an annual publication devoted to complicating received narratives about race. A few years ago, I gave a talk at Berkeley about the path of the copper milled across the street from my childhood home for electrical wire. Being lucky enough to speak with Cecil Giscombe about it afterwards, I noted that the whole project was basically an indictment of an educational system that didn't help us answer the question, what's across the street? Cecil had actually run trains through the Wire Corporation's Pennsylvania complex, and his response remains one of my favorite declarations ever about geography and research. He simply said, "That's a big question, what's across the street?" Let's find out what's across the street. Please help me welcome Cecil Giscombe.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you all for coming on this lovely Midwestern afternoon or evening. It's evening, and I'm going to read from two books. The first is this book, a book called Train Music, which came out in November. It's a collaboration with my old friend, the book artist Judith Margolis, and it was meant. The intention was that we were in New York. Both of us had family stuff. My family, her family, and she was going to visit. She lives in Israel, but had family scattered across the United States. We were going to get on the train in New York and go to California, where she knows people. She knows many people, and where I live. And I'd keep a journal. She'd draw some pictures. We'd see, whatever. It happened. It was meant to be casual, but it was December 2017, and I was returning to Berkeley from New York City so I could give a talk on white supremacy, which some people had just begun to realize existed. It was, as you remember, certainly a powerful time for a lot of people. White supremacy had just elected Donald Trump. And so it seemed suddenly for some people real. My talk to what turned out to be an all-white audience in Berkeley did not go well, not at all. I was pretty plain-spoken, but no one heard me. My response was a little later this book, published, as I said, last year in November. And I'm going to read just a couple of sections from it. It's an account of the trip from New York City to California. But obviously I was thinking about the upcoming talk, and it was written very much after the talk, and so the book reflects back on on what the talk was. Sharks. Sharks are a motif. Starting with the true story of the New Jersey attacks of 1920, which you're all aware of, I'm sure. Sharks came up into fresh water. And for some reason I grew up hearing about those. And the book ends with my love song to the Greenland shark, which is my favorite shark. The Greenland shark is the longest lived vertebrate. They're pretty sure they live to be 500 or 600 years, and maybe 1,000 years. They're very long-lived. I'm going to read a couple of sections. Late morning, New York Penn, Newark, Trenton, then into the 30th Street Station, Philadelphia, by 12:15. Electric locomotive from New York Penn to Philly, having crossed New Jersey behind that boy. Under catenary. Stories, cautionary tales that swept through childhood. Keep your head above water. Surprise, sometimes, a history of shark presence, even in fresh waters. The figure on which such tales were based. Train leapt the filthy Passaic. Mindless, nesting place, haunt, contagious, or seemed to. Train crossed the Delaware, the Raritan, etc. Shark had come right up Matawan Creek out of Raritan Bay and ate 4. Pearly white on the History Channel. Changed the power at 30th Street, one diesel to haul us from there on out to Pittsburgh. Traveling. The schoolboys might say, some traveling subject. Having agreed to address white supremacy upon my return to California at a round table. Symptom of what? Typical power. My agreeable nature fidgeting over the tracks. On the street, in stations unspoken of, standing water in ditches by the tracks. Feign my shock? Expect me, something said. Feign my shark. Water just standing there saying nothing. Remember me, said something else. Inure me, boys, to hardship and to the peculiar apparition. Bless public affairs and public issues. I work around the place. Gender me, boys, and have me dawdle over the tracks. Daniel Webster threw an inkwell at the devil's shadow on the wall because it was talking. Mistake my silence. Which kind of shark do you all want to be? Handsome face in the mirror? Second question. Train's the music. Train sings. Train just forgets about your eyes. Train sings. Beatrix, my old friend, had a Boston wife. Just that. Childcraft book, Animal Friends and Adventures, had one boy ride the China Clipper and had another, a modern boy, take the train to New York. Train's mystery song says, more than that. Pretty boys on the masthead, perching birds, plain-beaked, chalky figurehead. No one says a thing. The shark is out ahead. The train follows the shark. Had gone back to England and lived there for a while. Went to Canada, lived there again and again. Smoke stop at Sacramento, half empty by that afternoon. Then alongside, I'm gonna stop there and just start again and remind you, you guys know Ella Fitzgerald's version of Mac the Knife? Yes, okay. Starting with the shark has those teeth, babe. Okay. And she forgot the words halfway through. Had gone back to England and lived there for a while. Went to Canada, lived there again and again. Smoke stop in Sacramento, half empty by that afternoon. Then alongside Sassoon Marsh, way past the wreck she made of the song. You never heard a girl sing it, she said, meaning before, because of how she had sung it and swung it beyond the marsh. She and her fellas, spending like sailors. And then the old drawbridge at Martinez, California, came to that, crossed it. The shark is just the example. Salt water and the freshwater meet. Hail, fellows, shake hands under the round table. but how the train rocked along Carquinez Strait. The tracks parallel the water, curve where it does. Over in Africa, they call it the Zambezi shark up in that river. Over here, meaning this time way out in harborless Canada, it's the Greenland shark. That's who runs those seminars, way down under that ice. Unconsumable, maybe alive 1,000 years down there. Okay, so that was much excerpted train music. And I'm going to read from the book I finished earlier this spring, unpublished book, a book called Negro Mountain. Now, Negro Mountain is a real mountain that straddles the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. Negro Mountain, the signs are still up on the road. It's an uncomfortable name for an uncomfortable history. It was named in the 1750s for an incident in which a party of white settlers and entrepreneurs encountered a party of Native Americans. A battle ensued, and in the battle, a black man was killed as he bravely defended the white group's leader. Because of his bravery and self-sacrifice, the mountain on which he died was named after his racial designation. White oral Pennsylvania history suggests that his name was Nemesis, but I doubt that that is the name that his parents gave him. I've been to Negro Mountain. I've been to Negro Mountain. The book's about the incredible distance I felt from the landscape in which I lived during my 10 years in central Pennsylvania. It was a peculiar kind of haunting. I lived in a small county seat called Bellefonte. I taught at Penn State, 12 miles away. The landscape, trees, ridges, streams, and rivers, places I'm always drawn to, seemed to repel me. All of this is racial in complicated ways. Swaths of the book have apparently nothing to do with Pennsylvania. The book addresses all that, the skewed and complicated nature of that haunting, or it addresses all that more than anything else. The first section, the section I wrote, which of course is the section I wrote last, it's called 7 Dreams, and they're real dreams. The first being a dream that I had in which I remember vividly now, even this evening as I speak to you. I had the dream when I was either 6 or 7, and it's still it's still there in the head. First dream: wolves came up the driveway and through the side yard of the old house. This was in kindergarten time, and I stood still, though I was frightened to be in their midst. And they took note of me, but did not bite or threaten me. The light was light I had known by then, having seen it in the hour before a thunderstorm. Dull, bitter light, and everywhere, though without apparent source. The wolves had ragged gray pelts, bad fur, tufts of it, and their hindquarters were skinny in comparison to their very big shoulders. They'd come in apparently from the street, Giscombe Drive, and onto the property, which was nearly an acre and had once been a farmstead, and they parted around where I was standing. It was almost literally a wave of them, those wolves, as though they'd come up the hill from West 3rd Street, or somehow got through the chain-link fence of the VA cemetery that traced the hill on Giscombe Drive. A white friend wrote me, "The human figure passes through the animal pack unharmed." And she said that she saw the dream as being not about the wolves as much as passing through adversity. This exchange decades after the dream itself, which had been a thing of moment, visual, tinctured with obvious anxiety, current in my memory for that time before the year she and I met. Make no mistake, dear and articulate friends, I knew it was an unstable moment. My thumbs were different, I'd seen, from one another. Beyond the driveway had been pear and walnut trees. One passes through a wood, or a track does. A dull feeling overtakes you in the field. There had been a gate by the driveway, but only the posts remained, grown over by the hedges that stopped on either side of the entrance from the street. What do hills summarize? Origin stories? Right and left separated long before this. Bait me, love. I can pass until I speak. NCM, you phoned me when you saw that poem on Poetry of the Day. I was surprised. There you were. Thank you for that. I remember that. Second dream. I was a woman in a prison camp. My job was to work in the yard. I walked away, drifted north like I do, and came to Canada. But by then, I was a man dressed in a long Soviet coat, wool with a red collar. Better I would have retreated to the mountains, I thought, or the interior. Why not just go on into Canada, someone said. It was how the border had appeared so quickly when my experience was that the roads that were the way over were always further north than I had figured when I'd set out. In my experience, waking life, nothing had readied me for such an arrival. Walking north, I was surely out of bounds, a city woman, then a man indistinguishable from his own prowess. You know how I figure, I thought. Typically, I dreamed and at the same time watched the dream. The gate was open. I watched myself as if from a car at a drive-in movie. I could have been up on the angry mountains, I thought. That could be the subject matter or the theme. Someone else stole my coat at a soup kitchen while I ate, so I took another one, puffy, polyester-filled, and walked on, heading for a triangle of roads. I remembered coming out of the woods, having met those roads but as a young man. Figure that. The woods came down the hill and stopped, and a single bright road, looping, led into the recollected triangle. It was not, of course, really a triangle, but 3 ways, 3 lanes into the trees that met the bright road in a series of intersections. I perceived a common drama, but I saw endless jungle. Name me, I said. I had been a handsome woman of indeterminate size and color. If I were her, I'd be a different animal, said I. I'd be down on the coast. I'd have made a plan. Were I she, I'd likely be a monster's dark mother, I thought. I didn't know where to stop. The mountain intervened, unhidden, foul-figured. Ask me. Name it. Vividness can be misleading. I don't know where to stop. Name another ending. And the third dream, the last one I'm going to read from this series, is a poem from my dear friend Lyrae. On our long telephone calls, we talked about many things, and this was you reminded me of this. So, third dream. You reminded me of the dream. Third dream, I had come to a transit center, tucked into a hillside, and the trains were up on a long staircase, but the buses came in at street level, and in the lowest haunt were stalls where those not running were parked with doors propped wide open. I was down there at the foot of the mountain with them. There was statuary. There was a mild nausea which, dreaming, I'd mistaken for evil, and also a jaguar, a big one, unexpectedly stocky, slouching through amid the bus bays. But I was a colored doctor in the dream, in shirt sleeves and a silk tie, and I patrolled the concourses and the platforms too, where the trains were. Trains are a distraction, like explaining Negro luck. And no skilled stagehand was present to act out what Negro luck might really be on the mountain. I was a rolling avatar in the dream of the station, on patrol, a country doctor, an image. Follow the rhyme of the mustaches turn and twitch, dream that with its cigarette. Tuck in, suture me, count that. Aloof then, I'd have patrolled such natural boundaries. So country. A train was leaving, and I ran alongside for a time down the platform before I understood I couldn't keep up, so I found my car and gave chase that way, following the tracks out into the Tules because I knew how to do that, because I have a railroad sense. and kept to the state roads through bad mountain towns and would catch sight of the train on hillsides parallel to the ridges I was driving on. I'd keep watch. Similarly, the tracks would parallel the main street of each town I came through, and I'd slow and glance left, but the crossing lights and gates were not activated, so I understood or decided that I'd gotten ahead of the train. So country. Tuck on in, I thought, half awake, laughing in cool sheets. Negro luck rampant on the mountain. There was a bridge where I'd thought that the train and I would meet, thought that I'd flag it down at the Susquehanna River crossing. Sunset was violent. Evil's the long story. It'll slap you silly in the night season. It was dusk, entre chien and loup, when I arrived. And a poem from later in the book called Bald Eagle Mountain, just the mountain behind Bellefonte, the town where I lived. I'm as interested in Bellefonte as I am on the mountain. There's a mild nausea. There's having had a presentiment. There not being, apparently, enough white to the world. Measure it against the downturned mouth of Negroid displeasure. Trace the hill readers, study the Negro frontier, rest in the awful shadow. Let such fall and clang, or make note of the addresses herein. Let vexed be also a kind of interest, a two-hander for certain. One wishes, doctor, for an educated listener. Just look over their heads, she would say. And I'm going to close by reading the last section of the book is a prose poem, and it's called let's see, it starts here. The final section of the Negro Mountain book is called Notes on Region, and this is the beginning of that. Wolves came back to Negro Mountain. There was no pattern to it for either mountain or animals to occupy. It was not a story, but rather the germ of a shape, an undetectable weight. It was shapeless, finally, unmeasured. It was only relayed. Negro Mountain, the summit of which is noted above is the highest point in Pennsylvania, is a default, a way, among others, to think about the Commonwealth. Word came from Negro Mountain that a lifelong resident there had surprised a wolf in her dooryard. Summer 2016. Her carpenter, she said, had also seen the wolf on a separate occasion. Not a coyote. The population has flourished in Pennsylvania since the 1930s, but a wolf. Talk on top of one another, you mountains. Entre chien et loup. My French is awful. That means between dog and wolf. You can't tell the difference in the twilight. Entre chien et loup. What, Negro? Lie atop one another, anyone could say. Pennsylvania man, half jungle animal, talking. It varies. On such a mountain, a deliberate Negro man or a pensive Negro man might wish to be spirited away. Industry is a deep valley or a trough. Hurston wrote, mules and other brutes had occupied their skins. There is a long bottom to consider, not the path of a moving figure, but the swath. Opposite deep valleys are the hills, elevations. A common enough wish is to enter such places and or climb through them. Often enough, one sees death in the market or at work in an office under fluorescent light, explaining. Someone else might see death come across the summit, like weather. Death is worked toward. Death is explained. Such a Negro man might wonder what he needed to know for the sake of coherence and find the qualification daunting or amusing. Among you, it could be the figure's motion, between the reader and, say, the poem or the mountain at hand. Speaker, observer, Negro, poet, wolf, measure. All you. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecil. It's really amazing to get to hear just such recently published and unpublished work. I'm going to introduce Lyrae Van Clief Stefanon, who is an associate professor in the Department of Literatures in English and the American Studies program at Cornell University. She is the author of Open Interval, a 2009 finalist for the National Book Award and the LA Times Book Prize, and Black Swan, winner of the 2001 Cave Canem Poetry Prize and a finalist for the 2003 Patterson Poetry Prize, as well as the chapbooks Leading with a Naked Body with Leela Chantrell and Poems in Conversation and a Conversation with Elizabeth Alexander. She has been awarded fellowships from Cave Canem, the Lannan Foundation, and Civitella Ranieri. She has written plays and lyrics for The Cherry and Ithaca Arts Collective, and in 2018, her work was featured in Courage Everywhere, celebrating women's suffrage and the fight for political equality at National Theatre London. Born and raised in Florida, many of Lyrae's poems invite her readers to contend with the South as an imaginary place where real things happen. To engage with her work is to be at once in the swamps and in her mother's sewing room, which is also to say in the gap, which she described in our earlier discussion today as a space where time acts differently, where we might feel the force of its accrual or release. For some time, Lyrae has been working at the intersection of poetry and science, finding a way in language to express the chemistry of covalent bonds, and other modes of holding disparate things together. She is currently at work on a visual album, which we might be lucky enough to hear from and about this evening. Please join me in welcoming Lyrae.
Thank you so much. I'm going to try and read all new work. Thank you, Cecil, for reading with me. This is awesome. So I'm just going to go from where the manuscript opened, and I think I may read some unfinished work also during this reading, because I feel like that doesn't happen a lot. I'm somebody who's like really obsessed with process, and like I want to know how people make things and when they're unfinished and how they change over time. And so I'm trying to do that a little bit more in my work. This is an unfinished poem. One of the things that's really inspiring me right now is the work of a young woman whose name is Ashley Fox. Ashley Fox is the pole sport champion, and I am obsessed with her work and the ways in which when Ashley is performing, there's usually two poles on stage when Ashley is performing, and the figures that Ashley makes when she gets between the poles on stage become readable as mathematical equations in ways that are so interesting to me. And so I'm kind of obsessed with Ashley Fox right now. I jumped into Ashley Fox's DMs and I was like, can I just talk to you? And Ashley was just like, I'm very busy. But hopefully someday I'll get to interview her. And so here's an unfinished poem called Pole Sport. Where else would you begin? Where else would I? Without an audience, a deadly serious content. Some days I am content to dance. Some days I am content to watch, like you blurred into eerie light, a moon glow hue, against which again a black body's hung in animated histories of violence turned against equations. Out of the blue, you stretch into lambda, shape transforming the line into so many ways of noting transformation. No one believes either of us might wobble the world, shake it, woman slant, a word from moorings, point, and distribution. How measures still leave us unrecognizable. But while I'm up here on stage again, please, somebody, turn up some music. Pole sport. We turn and turn ourselves into the question. We turn ourselves against its gravity, an axis we defy. The idea spun current as an absolute value. Faith presents a gift for our unboxing between poles. We are the line women, hungry-handed transformers, handed lightning bolts striking. Who wants to address America? When I stand in between two poles, I am the absolute value of the lyric. I have been where she stands. Between poles, she is the determinant of gravity, a force she stands in for her own one now. A headline, no flag does justice. She scales the staff herself. Unflagging, she waves. And I really, really hope that you all will go and look at some of her performances online. There's a performance that I really love that I'm looking at where she begins that performance at the top of a pole, and the way that she's engaged with historical narratives. She begins that performance at the top of the pole, and it looks like a young woman has been hung. And so that when she kicks to life at the beginning of that performance, when the music starts, there's an actual scream that comes from the audience. And then by the end, she does that lambda pose between the poles in the middle of that performance. And then by the end of that performance, she is sideways off of one of the poles in this way, that the way that it like speaks to lynching and the black woman's body and pole sport, and the way I think so much about Chris Rock saying that his one job in life was to keep his daughter off the pole. And as soon as he said that, I thought, oh really? And why is that? That seems quite fascinating to me. What's up on that pole you so scared of? Now, but confession, full disclosure, I am former, I had a brief and illustrious history as a pole dancer at one point, and there's a poem at the end of one of my collections called Strips. So just to throw that out there. But still, when he said that, I was like, what you scared of though? So Ashley Fox. If I say Jodeci, does it mean anything to anybody in here? This poem is called Stay. It's a bop. And so it uses a section of the Jodeci poem, Stay, as its refrain. stay. Headed to the beach in late June, I rocked the quiet storm mix I made last week in a fit of nostalgia and bit spending. Silk and sweat, Levert, Tresvant and Gill, on and on for 99 cents a pop. 4 hours, so one loops long enough to get me almost anywhere I'm willing to drive myself. Jojo's voice, heavy as the torrid weak rung of laments, and all of my tears, you know, they left me drowning. Don't you know the sun? Those brothers beg, and I admit I do, as well as I know too the comforting dark. I do of a theater at midday, a matinee. I do cool air conditioning and film against the out here's hot, wet glare, a bath warm Atlantic exhausting the Florida coast. As I know too the impulse to steer. I do one's vehicle toward some other variety of where to veer toward a more familiar grind. Enough the difference between grief and its performance. And all of my tears, you know, they left me drowning. The sea, when I reach it, smells like salt, the same in Massachusetts as in adolescence, where crusty sweet from Krispy Kreme, hot glazed now, mingled with ocean grit on my fingers' tips, stay. Here and there on my tongue, you know I'm thinking about you. How one sweet ring might have preserved us from the crush and break surrounding. And all of my tears, you know, they left me drowning. I love Black pronunciations and stuff like that. That's the thing about that song that always got me, the way he says drowning, not drowning, drowning. All right. This is the beginning of this new collection that I am working on. This poem is called Blooming. Try to spell the teeth-sucking sound. Sound that shoots the eyes right sidelong toward the edge of a field, vision branched into full flowering, then drags the eyes back as swift, alert toward witness. The margin, people, leafy here. Don't say community like that. Don't say communion like that. Don't say communist like that. Here, efflorescing like sound that is unspellable. Spit pull and air's edge against the enameled walls inside one's maw. Sound frits, bites, soothes, sedge. A yellow field, breathing space, roots. To breathe is to heal, what a body might do in a field with a breath. To frit is to begin to prefuse sand and flux, but push the breath hard enough through it, and it is to call the dogs or to call attention to. St. John's wort, the sedge in this wild blooming. How bored of dull walls of every sort I am. A frustration of flowers pulled back over the tongue and stopped against the wall behind the teeth. A hiss that is a click. An image shuddered, a story the eyes shot. Someone placed a skull in the middle of a field. I'm stumbling, through, commissioned to still life this I can't finish until I invent a way of spelling an upside down T, a row of S's sucked backwards to a thick-tongued stop, like someone's snapped. A picture I don't want to describe, the skull, the wall. Let T stand for tool. Let T stand for tag, I'm it, commit. Let T stand for the work T does in try. Teeth, shoot, frit, witness. Careful, you don't end up in the Chattahoochee. My mother warned me. I am trying here not to open my mouth. Your heart knows where home is, Grandma reminded me. Understand what happens when a sound opens. If by assessment you mean how will I measure when I have sounded the proper spelling? What does it mean to thrive? I miss the gold that glinted in my mama's mouth and the gold that glinted in Grandma's mouth. Their sudden smiles, glorious mischief. Women no kin to one another, for whom witness meant to tell an old story. Notice the sedge, its structure. What of the work T does in notice? The structure, Aaron Kaima. If the work fails, let me had been breathing. Structure, if I fails, I still hold the work T does in delight. There's Florida baby girl and Appalachia grandbaby. I am still gleaning in Grandma's, that's St. John's wort, gold, and Mama's, look at God, glint. A simple gift, a breathless glimpse. Notions. This poem is actually called I, but it's a glyph, a punctuation mark, colon, M dash, colon, I. Notions have always been material. A flight to Paris, a pattern unfolded from a paper pouch marked facile, a snap to make the delicate sound punctuate an afternoon in mother's sewing room. Press the small square plastic box to trap épingle in a clear case, then step on a hidden pin, prick, snagged in the pink shag. Underfoot, a silver stitch in time wounds, nothing heals. The rift between mother time, mine, on my knees, pinning pattern to paper punctures the fabric. Orphaned girls spill out, like glass head pins spilled from a case map vectors on Rue des Anglais. The haberdashery, a wife study workshop in 1838. In 1988, mother wields the pounce wheel, chalks tracks, teeth showing the way a notion's violent. The needle jumps, but a presser foot keeps material flat while feed dogs grip yellow seersucker from below, where what a wife is still mechanical. Something held, something pierced, something guiding the process, something rhythmic. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel the orphaned girls like piecing, a shortage remedied by joining. Such lengths, a line of women in leg of mutton, she-goat sleeves, fabric ballooned over their arms like parachutes deflating, gone to study, seated and shrinking. Where is she, the black wife, someone seeking to be, if not lingering, where people press themselves, prone over lengths of silks that saved their lives, pressing the last of the air out, where piecing hides a lack to the untrained, without a notion how hanger, haberdashery join themselves in a motherless child, join a motherless child to an age, to ages. In the Noise and Whip, this poem has an epigraph from Gwendolyn Brooks, who writes, "It is lonesome, yes, for we are the last of the loud. Nevertheless, live, conduct your blooming in the noise and whip of the whirlwind." In the Noise and Whip, the whirlwind forms ahead, approaches flittingly as a butterfly might, as if it would alight upon my sister and me, strengthens, becomes visible, picking up debris, waves its hubris like a flag, would whisk us as the country is now whisked, except for our mothers bind you prayers over us, their peace be still tisk and tell-storm that harmonized knocks weather down, keeps us weighted against dry conversion to bland husks of death. Not only can I cry, I have a gift for life, my only gift. How young I learned to live nevertheless requires an elegance I put on like a woolen stole, then sheepish dropped my head as I walked in it, somehow ashamed. How soon I learned, how late. Break the line the way that you would break. Have broken with those who taught you you would still run. Break the narrative. A body is a story, a severed snake's head in the sassafras. And break down tears, a fluid space from which we might reassemble flight. I think I'll read just a couple more. This one, Eclipse, because the moon was eclipsed again the other night. I was watching this one out the window, and then just when it was about to start, the clouds came over and I was annoyed. But the last one, where it was the lunar eclipse, I got to see. And so this poem has an epigraph, "Oh, when the moon goes down in blood." Eclipse. A period is a pebble, a rock that blocks a ray. A ray's my heart, a beat in my ears, a chorus thud of marching boots, a crunch from which my eyes flee. Blaze, the gaze lifts, then ellipses, a wobbling slip toward strabismus. Cloisters, the cellulars locatable, may, alas, the signals scrambled. These devices, Heidelin? Where am I? In a book, in the bath, in a clawfoot tub, claw hammering a past moment in a current set, afloat on the edge of insight of an uncooperative vision. A black body wrapped in a white towel, anxious to reveal, then abandon. In unison, can you tell me how to get back to the sentence so I can serve it? There, a period is an embolus, a ticking clock, a bumbleclot, a green fuzz tennis ball struck with such force. Who almost sees stars? Who's almost lost from whose lack of listening? Girl, adrift on an ocean, not always the Atlantic, easing the mind of a woman looking toward a child across the way. No one is white here. Only the towel is white. Lay it on the sand. Lie down and relax. I would end here, except the periods full of blood, the towels soaked, the sand, the stone, the whole sea been gone red. And then I will read one last one. Thank you all so much for listening. Let's see what wants to be the last. This is On Silence. The heat bugs rev, a sound like the struggling stutter of a pull start mower. Sound stripped to tenorol, abandoning exhausted cuticle to August sun. Disembodied sound. Heat bugs, zzz, as though an abstraction of sleep were to try to rouse itself to fill the hot daylight. Heat bugs, my sister says, in that tone she gets of authority. I know sometimes she likes to lie. I don't hardly believe a word anyone says to me, but listen now for what they are trying to convey. A chip on my shoulder, I understood post-truth before the world soaked itself in it. True story. Once she and I drove through a forming tornado to get to Cracker Barrel. The heat bugs sing, zzz. If that emerging storm had come together fully above the car, we would have filled it with the doxology, her high mountain perfect pitch and my low flat Florida Pentecostal alto all up in the swirl, like the way we say to each other, I'm circling the drain on the phone when we're feeling bad, except the opposite, a lifting off instead, as though we were the mist lifting off the pond when we fish with Dad at 5 a.m. to beat the heat, and we overcast and snag ourselves in the trees, and we throw back the joke-worthy bass, and we bask in how he grouses after the bypass about the boat, the way it turns in the water the second he takes his hand off the throttle. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you so much for those gorgeous readings, Lyrae and Cecil. They have been working for us and sharing their work with us all day, so we don't want to overtax them, but if you're willing, we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Is that okay? Okay. So I do want to give people a chance who weren't able to be here at noon, if you have questions.
So I don't actually know, I didn't know you all had a history together. So what tied you up together initially, and when was this?
Cecil was my thesis advisor in my MFA at Penn State.
When I came to Penn State, it's kind of a little weird summer program. They gave me 2 graduate students to work with. This woman, Lyrae Clief Stefanon, and our friend Daisy Rao, who's living in Connecticut now. So, and we had kind of I thought a really wonderful summer. And talking about all sorts of things and cooking.
I was wondering what made the talk on white supremacy such a failure in Berkeley.
Yeah, I think that it was something that white supremacy was something that it was kind of new as a thing for large numbers of well-intentioned and well-meaning, what my grandmother used to call white people of goodwill. That and because it sounds so awful, white supremacy sounds like the Ku Klux Klan. That's what's been sold to everybody in the country. That's what white supremacists are. The Ku Klux Klan. No, not really. It's this whole big thing. It's everywhere. And I think that people weren't in 2017. My theory is that people were beginning to become aware of white supremacy, but that for many white people it was Trump was very embarrassing, and to be part of kind of maybe in some way that people hadn't anticipated to be part of that was kind of real hard to hear about. Now, less so now. This is 5 years math skills. 5 years later, it's become kind of it's a lot in the talk right now, and it's being debated on Fox News. Been reading about this stuff about Tucker Carlson recently, and how popular he is.
So kind of a secondary question too. I don't want to take up too much time if there's others, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts. I'm just learning that you were a railroad engineer. My mother worked at GE Transportation in Erie, so she was this small cog in the machine producing locomotives in America and elsewhere. But the question has to do with, it's maybe too big of a question, and the place of poetry within it, I think, is a vexed one. But why there continues to be a failed class solidarity that would maybe redress some of the, or not redress, but begin to address the racial divisions underpinning white supremacy in the nation, right? And what's your experience, as a locomotive engineer? What was, did you feel like white supremacy was more prevalent there than at the university, or is it the same everywhere? Do you know what I'm saying?
I should qualify my experience, and that I did the work. I was not in the life, if you understand the difference. With other people, numbers of other people. It's an interesting and complicated question. I operated a tourist railroad in central Pennsylvania, and it was a real railroad because we had to take tests and were schooled on rules, and the equipment was very real, and we operated on public thoroughfares, but it was not the kind of day in, day out things that railroad people who were in the life. I would recommend, by the way, Linda Neiman's book Boomer about railroad life. She PhD from Berkeley, couldn't get a job, academic job, till she became a brakeman for the railroad for 25 years, and she's written Boomer is a brilliant book. But solidarity, I was on the train back, the passenger train, Amtrak train, from New York City back to State College some years ago, and sitting next to a black man older than me, who was riding on a blue pass, which is a railroad employee pass. And the conductors came by to take tickets, and he showed them the blue pass, and they said, "What do you do for the railroad?" She said, "I'm a conductor." And they didn't believe him, and he had to prove it. They quizzed him. Do you know this guy? Do you know that guy? Do you know this guy? Do you know that guy? Oh, okay. And I looked at him and I said, "They didn't believe you." And he looked at me like I was a total idiot. He said, "Yeah, of course they don't." And so we talked. We talked for a while about that. In terms of engineers, I did ask. I've been waving to engineers since the 50s, and I've, including myself, I've waved to 5 black engineers since about maybe 1960 to be. And I asked about that. He said, well, they make a lot of them in Pittsburgh, but they don't. But what something happens in the cabs. There's a culture, macho male. I mean, I've seen, by the way, 2 women engineers in the last,
My uncle was an engineer too, so I have some, familiarity with the paucity of diversity in the field. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a culture, male, masculinism that happens in the cabs, and there are fights, and people get ridden up, and they leave the job. But in terms of, I don't know, it's the old story, and I see it in the news, on TV, even now. It's the divide and conquer. I mean, Lyndon Johnson, sorry, I'm going on. It's been on my mind recently. Lyndon Johnson said a long time ago, if you can convince the lowest white man that he is better than the highest black man, that white man will send you all his money. And that's still, as far as I can tell. I mean,
that's a Trump email.
Yeah. So, my work with the railroad, I was known as a railroad spokesman in central Pennsylvania. I was an anomaly, I think. And I was just one. And I wasn't going to take anybody's job, and I wasn't going to threaten. I was also a Penn State professor at the same time. So they maybe didn't quite know what to make of me. And so, it was just kind of, oh, okay, I guess you're okay. Yeah, here, have a beer. Sure.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you for your question.
I had a quick question for Lyrae. It seemed to me like when you read your poems, the theme of rhythm, the theme of rhythm seemed to be really prevalent in the way you were reading it. And I was wondering how much rhythm is a part of your writing process?
Very much. Very much so. And trying to think about it in different ways. I was saying earlier in the talk, I grew up in the Pentecostal church, and my students still laugh and everything like that when they're sitting somewhere and there's a song on and I start clapping and they're like, oh, that's Lyrae, and they're getting clap happy right now, and thinking about syncopation, and thinking about because I always am thinking about the gaps in everything, and so syncopation is a thing that's kind of constantly on my mind, and the mixture of that upbringing and my mom buying me when I was a little girl she bought at a library sale all of Shakespeare's plays on album. There was a set that they used to sell that I wish I had now on album with the text with them, and so I was like that dorky little kid sitting in my room listening to those plays on a turntable, and so the different rhythms are a thing that I think about all the time. I've been teaching a lot lately with Rahsaan Roland Kirk. I don't know if you know that jazz musician Rahsaan Roland Kirk, but that is someone to look up if you don't, and thinking about the way that everything was music to Rahsaan Roland Kirk, and that's how I feel, just kind of moving through life, listening with everything, and it's a thing that I don't find enough in poems when I'm just experiencing poems out in the world, and so that's a thing that I'm trying to get into my poems. Thanks so much for that question.
It's just such a pleasure to hear both of you. I'm Rachel Cohen. I'm on the faculty here, and I I teach writing about the arts, and every year I teach a poem of yours that is in that anthology that Elizabeth Alexander did for Jacob Lawrence. And it's always one of the highlights of the class, and it's always just a special moment to think about how language can address the visual or become visual. And I was thinking about that, listening to you reading, and I just wondered if you would say a little bit about kind of how you, maybe in that particular poem, but how you think about kind of spacing visual as you're working, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes. The thing about that commission that was so important to me was doing the research and learning about the panels, the 60 panels of the Migration series, that Lawrence painted all of the panels at once, one color at a time. And that is such a fascinating process to me, because those words, those paintings, though they seem representational to people when you look at them, those were abstract paintings until they were done. Like they only become representational when they're finished. And that's a thing that I'm also like kind of trying to do in my work, like both on the way that it works in the page and the way that it works in the ear, is to like try and get some of Jacob Lawrence's process into the work that I'm making too. And so, yeah, that's a thing that I think about a lot too.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful, and that's very helpful, because the colors do have that quality. Like the more I teach that poem, the more I find that there's this kind of spatial track, and
Yes.
that's really wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.